All right, we're here with Mr. Ray Szymanski, and I pronounced it Szymanski for about 3 weeks straight. I kept on talking about Ray Szymanski, but it's Szymanski, right? Perfect. Okay. Mr. Szymanski is a paranormal researcher and author of Alien Shades of Grays, Evidence of Extraterrestrial Visitation to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and Beyond, along with his latest book, Alien Shades of Grays, Victoria's Secret Truth. And for all the creepazoids that listen to our show, that's kind of a play on the title there is kind of a play on words.
It's a double play on words.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's a double.
Now, he's also a retired senior scientist / electrical engineer, if I got that correct, devoting nearly 40 years of service at the infamous Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Not only does he have knowledge of the deep reaches of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, but he spent the past decade traveling the globe and researching UFO and other paranormal phenomena. Now, like I said, thank you so much for being here with us, Ray.
Thanks a lot.
We are beyond appreciative. I think you're gonna have a good time. I think we've already had
already broken out ice.
Yes, right. Now I do have a couple things that I took directly from the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base website itself to kind of. There's two specific laboratories that kind of jump out to us whenever we go through our research. First is the Air Force Research Laboratory, or the AFRL. This is according to their website, which you might be able to change what and say here's what they actually do. But the AFRL is a global technical enterprise leading the discovery, development, and integration of affordable warfighting technology for our air, space, and cyberspace force. Space Force, I like that.
That's pretty sweet.
That's coming up hard and fast.
Yeah, it is.
With a workforce of more than 10,000 across 9 technical directorates and 40 other operations across the globe, the Air Force Research Laboratory provides a diverse portfolio of science and technology that range from fundamentally to advanced research and technology development. And next is NASIC, which you refer to several times through your book that we're going to talk about today. I'll let Rob touch on the NASIC description.
Yeah, NASIC says the DoD's primary source for foreign air and space threats. NASIC creates integrated, predictive intelligence in the air, space, and cyberspace domains, enabling military operations, force modernization, and policymaking.
That's the National Air and Space Intelligence Center.
Yeah.
So those sound pretty close to what they want us to believe is what they're doing there.
Well, Air Force Research Labs was my home for 40 years.
Oh, really?
Yes. I started out in what was called the Avionics Laboratory.
All right.
And then sometime along the way, Congress decided that there were too many labs. We had materials lab, and we had propulsion lab, and we had avionics lab. And they said, well, we've got to consolidate. And, there was some justification for that. But eventually, all of those different labs became a single laboratory called Air Force Research Labs. Okay. And then the former laboratory levels became directorates. So they just kind of changed names to appease Congress. But I basically spent my entire career assigned to Air Force Research Labs. Now, I did not always work directly for them. So I worked 10 years for what we call the five-sided wind tunnel. You would know it as the Pentagon.
Okay, there you go.
And I worked for an office called the Ada Joint Program Office, and I was what was known as an agent of the ADSPO. So basically, they paid Air Force Research Labs my salary and my travel and paid for my contracting. And I basically did their work, though my offices were in Air Force Research Labs. And I also was, for 2 years, I was the director of the Installation Civilian Wellness Program, where I worked directly for the base commander. So despite the fact I was assigned to AFRL, I was assigned to another unit, and I was working on their behalf. So my entire career is with Air Force Research Labs.
Okay, perfect. Now, whenever I reached out to you, we kind of had some back and forth for a while, but then finally we had the unfortunate tragedy of the Dayton shootings that in the Oregon district that occurred here in Dayton. And Ray reached out to us and he said, it just last night, it hit me that life is short. You don't know what's going to happen. Let's get together and talk about this, guys. And I said, what? No, there's never been a better time in the community here is still reeling. We're still getting through it. So we have a lot of local listeners here. So obviously we skipped a week after the Clinton episodes. Everyone thinks we're dead right now, but we're not actually dead.
We've gotten so many messages about it. And then we had a Facebook page like that. It was pretty much like a group that we ended up shutting down coincidentally right after that episode. So it's like everything's like falling in line as if we got taken out.
Everyone thinks we've been shot in the back of the head.
Paul is
Yeah.
dead.
Yeah, exactly. We've committed suicide twice.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, like we talked about before we started rolling here, some other shows you've been on. This is a little different. I think we're a little normal than some of the people you've talked. You've talked to some really, some really great hosts. But then sometimes I listen to a few of your interviews. I'm like, man, Ray is doing a really good job for what he's being dealt for the card the hand he's being dealt right now. So this is like I said before, I think this is going to be a completely demographic. We have a lot of 18 to 30-year-olds, a lot of people that are really caught up in this Let's Storm Area 51 stuff. So a lot of people that are interested in this Bob Lazar stuff going right now. And a lot of people are saying that Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is actually, better known to our people as Area 52 right now. I know there's a few different places in America that kind of claim the title of Area 52, but for us here in Dayton, Area 52 is Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. That's what we're going to call it officially
Works
from the
for me.
Brohio podcast.
There you go.
Well, it's really strange that you should mention that because I was in an episode of Ancient Aliens, which
Right,
aired
nice.
on the 1st of June last year, and the title of that episode was Area 52.
Okay.
And
yeah, I
one
did
of the
read that
reasons they
today.
had me on there is representing the Wright-Pat knowledge base and, try to say, well, tell us if they're doing Area 51 stuff back over at your hometown. So it's perfect assumption there.
Perfect. Now, and one other thing I would like to hang my hat on, a few of the hosts you've talked to, they lead with, I didn't read the book, but I did read the book.
You spent all week reading the book.
I paid for the book, and then he shows up and he gives us autographed copies. So my $10 wasn't for naught on my Kindle.
Kindle, you cheap.
Well, it was crunch time.
He needed it fast.
Actually, what it was listed
Don't share it.
for sale on. It was listed for sale at the Air Force Museum
It is.
on the shelf.
It is.
And I went there and I had a very small amount of time and I had my 2-year-old daughter with me and she was being a tyrant. She was being a jerk. I was ready to feed her to the ghost there at the Air Force Museum. And this old lady's like, she's looking around for it. She can't find it. I'm like, is there someone else that possibly knows where this book is at? She's like, they're usually in alphabetical order. Did you say his name was Szymanski? I said, oh, we're going to be here all day. So she helped. We couldn't find it, but
it turns out there's a separate display for my book in one of the little alien-oriented corners that they developed.
Okay,
That's
And-
great.
yeah, so my book is in there, and I keep them filled, seasonally.
yeah,
Awesome.
So then I said, I'm going to have to do the Kindle deal. Sorry.
Good job. Good job.
But there's nothing better than having a hard, a softback hard copy of the
And autographed.
And autographed,
and
exactly.
autograph. Yes.
Autographed.
Now, first off, this is the question that you lead off all of your interviews with. Well, I'll get to it. That the question where, the first moment you're like, oh my God, but take us through as much as you can what a regular day, I guess for the average of your career, what a regular day would have been like for Ray Szymanski at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base as your job as a senior scientist.
Okay, as a senior scientist, I would have been program managing. And I'll give you for instance. For a 10-year period, I worked for what was called the Ada Joint Program Office, and it was sponsored by the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering out of the Pentagon. So my direct bosses they were stationed in the Pentagon, and for the most part, were usually PhD level type folks.
Okay.
So I had contractors all over the country developing software that was going to benefit the acceptance and utilization of the Ada programming language.
Okay.
So Ada was a language developed by the United States Department of Defense in order to get around the problem that every time a contractor put out a weapon system and had a computer in it, they programmed that computer with a new programming language. So by the time, the mid to late 80s were rolling around, we had 500 weapon systems and 500 programming languages. Well, you can't have that. You can't switch engineers between projects and that type of thing. To do oversight is almost impossible because now you've got to be an expert in 500 languages. So I was on a team that helped develop the requirements for a programming language called Ada. And then eventually my team developed the technology to help make that a success. So a compiler will take an Ada program and it will convert it into the language that the weapon system computer can understand. Well, you don't want to buy a compiler that takes the high-level code and converts it to a low-level code and not have a high-quality tool. It's like, taking a sledgehammer to a finished nail.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we developed technology whereby the government could select their compiler systems, for example, using some technology and ensuring that the F-117 that might be flying Ada is going to fly good Ada and not just something that's been cobbled together in a back room. So I did that for 10 years. And so my job was to inspect the code that was being produced, to test the code, to read all the documents, to make sure that the requirements were being met, that the contractor was on schedule, that was on cost, and then to get this information out into the public.
Okay.
So we were always briefing at conferences and writing white papers and briefing people up in the Pentagon. So it was very busy, a lot of computer work, a lot of telephone work. In fact, if your audience types in my last name and the word Ada, ADA, they'll find some documents out in the public domain that I wrote as part of that project.
Okay. Perfect.
So very, very busy, always coordinating people, doing technical work sometimes, working with financial people. It's kind of like a jack of all trades when you're a program manager.
Sounds like a mess.
It was extraordinarily interesting. It was
Sure.
the best time of my life.
I bet. Oh, that sounds wild.
Seems very busy.
Multifaceted, all kinds of wonderful things going on there.
Yeah.
Well, if I had to tell you about my job, I eat most of the day, and then I go change belts sometimes, and then occasionally something electronically breaks down, and they call me, and I'm like, man, we're really serious about this electrical stuff at the beginning. But when did you officially retire from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base?
The last day of September 2011.
Okay. How is retirement going for you?
Fantastic. That's when I decided I was going to take my interest in this UFO thing, and I thought that I had a story to tell, and I started to get more serious about my research.
Sure.
I started to travel. I just really took it as a, hey, I might do this as a second career, and here we are. I tell you, I work more days, more hours doing this
I know you do.
than I did in my regular job.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been great. I play golf and I run. I've run 16 marathons. I've run probably equal as many of that of halves. I've got a half marathon coming up at the end of next month at the Air Force Marathon. I'm also a photographer, so no, I don't run and shoot pictures at the same time.
That'd be fun.
I run the race, yeah,
Okay.
and then I go to the VIP tent and
That's
do that
great.
kind of thing. So retirement is fantastic.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Are you still allowed access on the base, or how does that work? I'm not sure how a civilian. I know I have family members who are retired military, and they'll take me to the PX or whatever you get groceries. I'll go with them to the grocery
commissary.
The
Yeah.
commissary.
to get groceries, but I'm not sure how a
You
retired civilian.
No, we were never able to use those military
Okay.
facilities, but you get your card is very near what they call a CAC card, your base access card is, but there's a chip that's removed that gets you into doors and stuff.
Okay.
So basically, no, there's still something embedded in there that they scan, and they know when you come on base. I don't know
Okay.
if they know when you go off base, but
Oh, they do.
they probably do.
Especially you.
I'm sure they have their ways.
I'll let Rob take the next question here.
Let's see here. Where are we at?
He doesn't know. He's lost.
My laptop was asleep.
Okay.
There we go. So, were the aliens the brunt of many office jokes?
A lot of people joked about it because they really had no knowledge.
Right.
Their knowledge ended at Project Blue Book used to be here at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and therefore we had aliens, and I've heard a few things on television, and so they never really studied it and didn't take it seriously. I know some young folks, we're talking 25 to 30-year-olds who went to work at NASIC, and there was a heating and cooling maintenance going on, and some of the ductwork was banging. And the older guy says to the younger guy, who was a friend of my son's, "Don't worry, it's just the aliens."
See, that's what I figured would have been. It's like a hazing the new guy or the young guys.
Speaking of hazing the new guy, like I said, I read the book. Why don't you take us through that first day on the job with Corvette Al, and what transpired to make you think, "Oh my God, where am I?"
Oh, that's a great question. It actually was the first week. Might have been the first day, but I think they gave me a break.
Okay.
So it was called Building 22 at the time, and Building 22 is still alive and well, but it's been renumbered. So there's a 2-story business office, maybe has 50 offices on 2 floors. Then connected to that is a 250-foot length hangar, which is now the Wright Field Fitness Center.
Okay.
Then on the other side of that, the third part of that building is a second 2-story business office. So the gym is now sandwiched in between those 2 business offices. So Al says, "Hey, I'm going to take you out our building through this dark hangar to the other business office, and the Greasy Spoon is there." He didn't say coffee shop. He said Greasy Spoon.
Sounds like something right up my alley.
I know, right?
Spoon.
Sign me up.
And so I said, "Okay, cool. Okay, Greasy Spoon, haha." So we stepped down this short ramp, and back then it was dark, just dark curtains, and there was nothing in there but like spider webs and some maybe old equipment. And
so you think anyways.
Yeah. So I think, and that stuff's long been
Sure.
mothballed. But he says, "Hey, have you heard about our aliens?" Which was the original title of my book. Have you heard about our aliens? And,
That's a good one too.
That is a good one.
and that got voted down. I
like
told
it.
some people about it. So anyway, Al says to me, I said, "What aliens?" He said, "Well, 1947, there was a crash, and they brought the occupants and their machines here for evaluation." And I was like deer in the headlights.
Now today I'd be like, "Hold on a second, buddy. You can't just drop that bomb on me and keep on walking to the Greasy Spoon. We got to talk about this for a second, Corvette Al."
In a dark hangar.
Yeah.
So I'm going.
Such an ominous place to
it
tell
was
you
an
that.
ominous, yeah. I mean, he could have told me in the bright sunshine. He could have told me once we're in the coffee shop, but he drops this on me as like we're walking. I'm like, ooh, look at the time, man. I gotta go. So we have this conversation about what he knew, and he said things like, "Well, I said, where are these aliens?" He goes, "Well, they keep them in the tunnels." Well, that's another revelation. I go, "We got tunnels." And he goes, "Yeah." So I said, "Well, can we go see these aliens in the tunnels?" He goes, "Oh, no.
Not today. You're not ready for that.
Well, yeah. Well, why not? He goes,
Just
"Well,
about passed out when I told you they were alive."
He goes, "Because it's a secret."
Okay.
And I'm going, "If it's a secret, Al, how do you know about it?" Right. Now, this is my first week, and I didn't know secret from top secret from, anything. But I just knew the word secret was ominous.
And one thing I don't really recall in the book, how long had Al been employed for Wright-Pat whenever you started working there? Whenever that fateful day when he took you for the walk to the...
Al was a mid-level engineer, about a GS-11 at that time.
Okay.
So he probably had to have been employed 5 to 7 years.
Okay.
And the key thing that the folks who haven't read the book, and I hope that will become a small group soon, Al went on to become a member of the Senior Executive Service, which is a flag officer equivalent. So it's not that it was just some, run-of-the-mill guy that walked back and forth to the cafeteria every day. He went on to have a brilliant career.
That's great.
It meant he was the equivalent of a general or an admiral. And you don't promote dummies, and you have to be approved by Congress in order to get an SES ranking. So he was a guy mid-level, probably worked several years there already. And by then it was 1973. Blue Book had been on base for 22 years. It was a widely known story that Blue Book was there, was in the newspapers, and so he had this general awareness of that, and he was just letting me know, "Dude, you come to a very interesting place."
Yeah, that's good. We call it Area 52. Now, since you've started this, I guess, quest for, we'll call it the quest for the truth, or the quest for, what's really going on at
enlightenment.
Yes. What's really going on at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base? How has the experience with former coworkers been during your travels and research? Have some of them been more receptive? Have some of them said, "Hey, Ray, you need to slow your roll for a second because you're going to get yourself into trouble"?
Interesting enough, I gave a talk, for example, 2 years ago in Fairborn at the Historical Society, and a handful of the former people that I work with showed up, and they were amazed, surprised, gave me great encouragement.
That's awesome.
In fact, before I retired, when I was starting to get into this, I worked with some senior guys, and a couple of them were actually dropping me breadcrumbs to follow because they were getting
That's
soon.
great.
They were getting ready to retire.
That's incredible.
It was, and so if I was heading down the wrong path, I go, look, and I'm going to be looking at so and so. They would go, I don't think that's worth your time. However, there's going to be a show on next week. You really need to see that.
There's a faux wall on the 3rd floor. That's
There's a vault in Building 45 behind the cafeteria stand.
oh man,
You need to go see that.
And your brain just going whenever they tell you these things, right?
Yeah, so they were very cooperative, and as you saw in the book, I had 2 former senior executive service guys that were going to help me try to get a piece of metal that a friend of mine was going to volunteer for testing if they could get the materials directorate to do it. So here's 2 guys that headed laboratories, and they were interested in getting metals tested that I told them might be from a crash.
Right, and we do touch on that later on when things get a little more heated here. So I hate to jump straight to the good stuff. We got to get these people to stick around.
Well, I'm a writer, so I like to kind of pre-stage things.
Yeah,
I understand.
Set
Keep your
everything up.
audience interested.
Right.
Now, this next question, this kind of goes along with the story that I have that I'd like to share with you. But were there places on the base? So I've only been on the base once. And when you speak about the tunnels, I went there with one of my best friends. He was in the Army, and we needed beer. We were like 2021. We needed a lot of beer, and we went to Heidelberg, and they said it'll be $400 for how much beer you need. And I said, my God, I don't have $400. And he said, we can go to the Class 6. We can get beer. I can get all this beer, and it's going to cost about 30% of what it would at Heidelberg. So he took me on the base to help him carry all these kegs, and I'm noticing all these vents on the ground, the kind of the type of vents you would see on top of a house or a warehouse or a laboratory. And they're all over. There's just flat. It's like, it looks, you see grass as far as you can see, but then there's just like spinning vents all over the place. So like you spoke about the tunnels, there's undoubtedly some type of intricate underground something
City,
there
pretty much.
that I don't know. I don't know what it is, but I know I can see that it's there from the small, hour that I was on the base whenever I went there to carry all that beer. But were there places on the base? Now, I guess you had your office building that you would go into every day, but were there places on the base that were more secured? Were they secured by more than just a key card? I would think to get into all the various doors in the base, you would just like your badge would be like the main method of getting through all these doors. Were there places that were more than that? Or would it deny your key card, or how would that work?
Well, first of all, those little spinning air things you saw, those vents, there are utility tunnels, steam tunnels that connect all parts of the base. So generally, if you open up one of those, there's usually a dual metal door you can open up right next to one of those little tiny brick buildings that only stick up about 2 feet from the ground.
Right.
And you see that vent. Those are pretty much utility tunnels for the most part. Now, access to the base is you have a card and it's got an active, maybe an RFID tag in it. So they scan that so you get on the base. Then to get into your building, you generally would have to insert a card and enter a key code. Okay. So then you're inside the office complex. Then for other workers, there could be multiple levels after that. For example, there would be, let's say there's a vault that is off of one of the hallways that they got into. So now they have to use a combination lock, or they have to use other points of access to get in.
Okay.
Then once they get inside of there could be 2 or 3 levels of security, and they have other badges and other codes. So, you could be leaning forward with 12 pounds of badges, depending on your job. So it just goes on. And I never really worked at that level, so I can't tell you exactly how many there are.
Sure.
But I'm aware of maybe at least a handful of different nestings. So yeah, it can be pretty intense.
Okay, and to roll that into my story, I took a job. It was a horrible job working private security, and one of our main contracts was to work all of the Waffle Houses in the area. Because when the bar lets out, all the drunk people go to Waffle House. And it was the duty post was to sit at the Waffle House and make sure the drunk people didn't kill each other and keep out the riffraff, essentially. the preferred Waffle House of all the Waffle Houses was the one right next to the base, right there on, I guess, Colonel Glenn Highway.
Right. And National Road.
Yes. That was the preferred post. And I got put there often. And there was a bar next door, but seldomly did the place get crowded. It was usually empty throughout the night, but on more than several times per week, the security forces, the airmen would come over on their lunch break, or just some of them couldn't sleep, and they would come over in their uniforms, and they would just sit at the counter, and they would just drink coffee. And me being the person that I am, I would always strike up a conversation with these guys, because I'd ask about their jobs. I would ask about, how long they're going to be here. And in one occasion, there was a gentleman, he said, man, we got some pretty weird places that we have to work. And I said, yeah, I would imagine working the front gate, or the main gate. That would be, you would see some weird stuff all week long. He said, no, there's stuff weirder than that we have to work. And I said, oh, really? Tell me more, please. And this guy said there was a post that he spoke of specifically that was several stories below ground, and they would descend to this a hallway, and there would be a long hallway with doors off the side of it, and then there would be one door at the end of it, and there was a table there with, it's kind of your desk with your log and one small computer, and your only post orders were to shoot and kill and anything that came out of the door. And that was for 12 hours on, 12 hours off. That was his specific post, was to sit there at this door and shoot and kill anything that came out of this laboratory door. He said no one ever came out of the door.
Could you imagine showing up to work and that being your job detail?
No one ever went through the door. And I said, you know what, this guy's probably done this before. He's just yanking my chain. He shared the story and it always stuck with me. Well, fast forward a couple weeks later, another airman comes in for the security forces, and I start talking to him. And I'm like, how was work this week? He's like, oh, it was fine. Nothing crazy. And I was like,
I had to shoot a guy.
Right, yeah. I had to shoot something. I don't know what it was, man. I had to shoot something. And mind you, this is a completely different guy. And he says, I asked him, I said, were you mostly just driving around giving out tickets, or what were you doing this week? He said, well, I was in some of the facilities this week. I said, did you work underground at all? He's like, it's funny that you ask. I had a job this week, and I swear to God, the guy started looking around like he was about to get killed. And he said, I had a assignment this week, and I had to go down, and I shit you not, man, they gave me a rifle and set me in front of a door and said, shoot anything that comes out of it and kill it. And I'm like, that's funny that you should say that, because I've heard that before. And he's like, are you serious? And he wanted to know the guy, his name. He wanted to know what he looked like. And I'm like, all this, all of it's left me. I don't remember, because I didn't know if this is possibly a plan to freak out the security guard at the Waffle House, or
it was just the same guy with a different haircut.
It definitely was not. The first guy was blonde and he was weird as all shit.
Yeah.
The next guy he looked Italian almost, the dark hair, and he was definitely from New York. But just that story alone, with what I've researched over the years, and I'm just like, man, what if those guys are telling the freaking truth? Maybe that's just a post where they put some of their dumb guys and say, shoot and kill anything that comes out of the door.
And they just want the guy off the tour for the day because he's dangerous. And they go, we know how to keep this patrol safe.
Yeah.
Put Joey down there.
Yeah, watch the door, buddy. Watch the door, Joey.
He's so good at watching the door.
Now, with that being said, most of the base is, I guess, patrolled by security forces of the Air Force. Was there a presence, aside from your run-in on the golf course, which we'll talk about later, was there a presence on the base that seemed more than just your run-of-the-mill security forces? Perhaps people that you knew that they were into some big stuff, maybe, I guess, part of the security regimen, but not necessarily just the basic security forces.
Early on, I came to the base in January of 1973. And at that point, the Vietnam War was over. We were relatively in a peaceful situation. We didn't have this terrorist thing, that the government wasn't doing that to us yet. And at that point, most of the guys guarding the gates were civilian gate guards in kind of a dark gray with a little patch. And basically what they did was read the newspaper, look down, and when a car came in, they would put one eye, on whether the Reds won that previous evening, and the other eye on the car coming in. They would wave, and sometimes their head would never even come up.
Yeah.
But then, as we got into, the 80s and we were doing Desert Storms and those kinds of things, and the ops tempo picked up, then we saw they doing away with the civilian gate guards. And then back, when we had 9/11, that's when the shift hit the fan. And, we went to full bore dogs and M16s and bags and triple redundant, backup at the gate. So, we see it mostly in the exteriors.
Okay.
But every building on the base pretty much has a vault. How many vaults are within sight? Those vaults just depends on the kind of work they're doing. I don't recall seeing, anybody in my buildings in the interior doing security. Now, there were people there who were gating in your guests. So if I had my contractors coming in for a meeting, they had filed paperwork, people knew they were coming, they had IDs, I had to come down to the front desk and escort them up. They were always in my sight, that kind of thing. But there was never any overt changes except at the front gate. And not only that, but the tempo of the guards, for example, they might make one car in area B might make a tour around the entire base, which is only a few acres, in an hour. Now there's 4 cars checking every lock every 5 minutes.
Wow.
So the tempo has totally changed there. And that's what I've noticed. But since 9/11.
Yeah. I can imagine that would be a drastic change in the security at that point. Did you have was there ever people that you ran into in the base and you thought to yourself, we all have strange coworkers, but did you ever meet people in the base? You're like, that person is stranger than strange, or that person,
they're just off.
It just, something is not right about that person.
Yeah, there's a woman at the base, and she knows who she is. I still think you look like a reptilian.
Perfect. Yeah, she's definitely listening. She probably loves our show.
So I can't wait till I start going back to the gym, and then she's going to go, oh, yeah. There were a couple of strange people, but nothing that I would say, definitely they were. But I've been at conferences.
Oh man, that's we didn't touch on the beginning of this. You've been to hundreds of conferences and done hundreds of interviews, possibly thousands of interviews. I don't know what the numbers are, but you've met a lot of people in the UFO community, which goes hand in hand with, that person's a little bit different. But there's people out there that have genuinely had experiences and genuinely have a true story to tell, and it's hard to separate that from the people that are like, I've been touched, just weird people.
Well, there was she's a world-class hypno-regressionist, hypnotherapist.
Okay.
Her name's Barbara Lamb. And one year at the International UFO Congress in Arizona, she did a talk called Meet the Hybrids.
Oh, nice.
Meet the Hybrids. And these were people that claim that they were, their families were hybridized through alien contact.
Oh,
and there was a woman that she brought forward that looked like a reptilian. I'm not kidding. No, I know it sounds funny. But she had her picture up there. So we break for lunch, and I go to the little cafeteria to grab a sandwich, and I sit down, and the tables were outside. This is February now in Arizona, so it's beautiful weather. And I sit down, and there's 10 people can sit at each one of these round tables. So I'm going to sit in the 6 o'clock position. I open up my sandwich, and I look across the table to the 12 o'clock position, and there is the reptilian woman. I almost
flies.
I almost swallowed my tongue, and that was the woman that Barbara Lamb had introduced in her talk. And I thought, oh my God, eat your sandwich, keep your head down, because I wouldn't know what to say. And I was like, you couldn't not look up. And I go, if I look up one more time, I'm going to get blinded. But I have run into people that I would say, if they told me I was a hybrid, I'd go,
yep, you're right.
dude, or dudess.
You got to go
Makes
on.
perfect sense.
It makes perfect sense. Yes, but not in the general population, right, Pat? Not that I could put a finger on.
As Rob pulls 2 dozen crickets out of his cooler over there and starts eating.
You're right.
Now, there was an experience that we'll touch on later I've personally had one sighting of a craft here locally. It was near Franklin. I was riding my motorcycle and I looked up and there was like a pencil shaped craft in the air. And I said, "Oh my God, that looks strange." And I looked down at my speedometer and I looked back up. There wasn't a cloud in the sky that day. And as clear as day as I saw it the first time, when I looked back up the second time, it was just gone. There was nothing. And I'm not one to, I haven't had a lot of experiences like this in my life. So, and it was just, and when that happens to you, you're like, what did I really just see? But are you aware of any heightened UFO sightings near Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, or I guess the Miami Valley area?
Yeah, it goes back a long, long way. But if we start like in the 50s, I like to call it the nuclear highway. In Ohio, there was a place called Fernald, and it was also called National Lead of Ohio. And they called it Fernald because it was outside a little town called Fernald. Now, Fernald became famous because the EPA was ratted out, and the citizens discovered eventually that Fernald, which produced enriched radioactive components for the weapons world, they eventually calculated, and I'm sure this is a conservative estimate, they put over 1 million pounds of radioactive dust into the environment.
Oh, how nice.
Now, it went into the water, the ground, into the lungs.
Those kids have horns there for sure.
Well, it turns out that I actually, in book 2, I connect the fact that Victoria only lived 5 miles west of Fernald, 5 miles east of Fernald.
Okay.
And I posit that the reason that she has been observed and taken and abducted and has been part of the breeding program is because of her exposure to the radiation out of Fernald.
And all that's in your second book.
That's in my second book. But the point I'm trying to get to is that, and I also document this in Victoria's Secret Truth, is that starting in a place in Indiana, coming all the way Kentucky and all the way north through Michigan, there were a number of industries that were involved in the production and handling of nuclear material. You had Mound Lab, you had Wright-Patterson, they had their own nuclear reactor. You had Fernald, who had dumped 1 million pounds of radioactive dust into the environment. You had machine shops, and one in Oxford that was machining these radioactive ingots. Wow. And it goes on and on and on and on. So if you look at the National UFO Reporting Center, which is a database for all UFO reports, and you plot those up along I-75, and if you put a little light on them, like that little game, it would just blind you because there were so many sightings, because these things were attracted by the nuclear goings on. And sure. Wright-Pat had a number of famous sightings right over the base.
In your opinion, what now, I've heard this before, the aliens are that's their thing, is the nuclear stuff that we got going on. What would be the concern for an alien, in your opinion? Why do these nuclear facilities create such a hot spots for UFOs?
Okay. Wow. How long is this program?
I gave you, I said 2 hours. Okay. I told my wife 2 hours. So
okay. And I've got to meet somebody for a beer at 7:30. So, okay. So one of the reasons I think they're attracted is, you know how we have these new phones that you can put it next to somebody else's phone and you can get a charge, you can do a recharge? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, one of the things I think they're doing is they're recharging. Many times they're seen over power lines, they're recharging.
Okay.
That's what they're doing. Just, okay, thank you. One of the great New York blackouts was supposedly they got a little bit too much charging, and what they did is they were sucking the juice out, and bam, they tripped the breaker, and that's when they cascaded.
That was aliens like Nick and Rob driving.
Yeah, right. It wasn't there the one that was out west. Which one was it? Was it the Arizona one where the spacecraft just followed the highway?
That was the Phoenix Lights.
Phoenix Lights, yeah, Phoenix Lights,
1997, and it hovered over the Phoenix airport. So the first thing is, they're tapping off the energy thing. The other thing is that yes, they're concerned about the pollution, and they're worried about us putting nuclear stuff into their backyard, which is outer space. Yeah. So you're familiar with the famous case where in North Dakota, they flew over a missile silo that had 10 nuclear missiles in it. And one by one, boom, 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 they took them all offline.
I have not heard this.
Oh my
No,
God.
no.
It's a very, very famous. In fact, they did it more than once.
Wow.
So in
And where was this at?
now you asked me too quickly. It'll come to me.
North
But,
Dakota?
Yeah, there was we have missile silos. We
Okay, it
used to have-
shouldn't be hard to
Yeah.
get. Google
yeah,
knows
it's not
everything.
hard to find. Just like U.S. nuclear missile silo shut down, and I'm embarrassed that I can't tell you what it is.
No, that's
but
all right.
but I've actually met the guy who was in the silo, who was panicking.
Yeah.
Now it happened the other way with the Russians during that same time frame. Our missiles were shut down, and they eventually found out there was no reason for the failure. And oh, by the way, when the aliens left, and there were guards outside the silo, so you have the missile men inside doing the launch. Okay, we're going to launch, and then you have the guys outside guarding, patrolling, and everything to make
Right.
sure nobody messes with the caps on them. So the outside guards are going. They're calling into the comm center. We got this 100-foot glowing ball of something, and it's right over the silo. And then
Wow.
the guys inside are going, by the way, the missiles are shutting down. They're all
Holy
going
crap.
offline.
Oh, wow.
But it got worse. During that same time frame, they played a little prank on the Russians. They brought all the Russian missiles online and started the launch sequence. So the Russians thought their nukes were being launched.
There's some dirty diapers that day.
Do you know, if you read that story, they said that the guys that were in the missile silo that day, they all went gray within a week.
Oh, wow.
They were guys within their 30s. Their system so shut down on them, and whatever
Yeah.
physiology was destroyed, they all went gray. But there's also
Wow.
another famous case. You can look at the Russians. So imagine their position. So anyway, I think they're interested in showing that they can shut us down. They don't want us up, that we're tribal warfare people. They don't want us up there
Yeah.
where we're going to pollute their stuff. They're tapping off. Plus, they're interested in folks who've been exposed. Imagine if they find somebody who is resilient to radioactivity. That is a perfect person to choose for your hybridization program.
Yeah. If it indeed is a thing.
It is a thing. We can talk about that later. But those are the top three things that come to my mind.
Okay. That's perfect. That makes sense, because it didn't make sense to me before.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, are you at the Project Blue Book part?
Yeah. My computer just wanted to
Okay,
take an
it's
update,
all
so I had to back out of that.
Just to bring everyone up to speed on Project Blue Book, because a lot of people they're not hip to the fact that Project Blue Book was headquartered here at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Project Blue Book was a United States Air Force study into unidentified flying objects conducted from 1952 until 1970, which is it ended just a few years before you started at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The Air Force summary of the results is, now this is the official summary from the Air Force.
Take this for what you will.
No UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force was ever an indication of threat to our national security. There was no evidence submitted to or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorized as unidentified represented technological developments or principles beyond the range of modern scientific knowledge, and there was no evidence indicating that sightings categorized as unidentified were extraterrestrial vehicles. At the conclusion of Project Blue Book, nearly 13,000 reports of UFOs were investigated. Only out of those 13,000, 718 of those reports were conclusively identified. So almost 12,500 were not able to be conclusively identified. This is according to...
No, that's the flip. 701 were not identified. The rest were explained away.
Okay, so
the vast majority, they said they explained away, and it was a small percentage, and it's called the 701. It's a very famous number in ufology.
Okay, that I got my research from Rationale Wiki, so I'm gonna.
It got flipped. Somebody flipped it.
I'm gonna go back and tell them they suck.
Yeah.
For sure. But like I said, many people are unaware that the Project Blue Book headquarters is here in Dayton, Ohio, at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I personally feel that the Project Blue Book is a lot of smoke and mirrors. I'm sure you subscribe to the same theory there. What shortfalls occurred during the research of Project Blue Book, in your opinion?
Well, Project Blue Book started out as an investigation, and they quickly discovered that they were dealing with a real phenomena. In fact, there was a general who went on television, and it's one of those grainy gray things that you'll see in every documentary. And he said, people are reporting, ordinary people are reporting extraordinary things, and there's something to it. And then they let it die. So they kind of appeased. This was like a 1952 announcement. Then for the next 17 years, they had Project Blue Book. And when the Air Force quickly realized that they had a real phenomena, a real problem, and it was shutting down your nuclear missiles. So how can you say that? How can you say that 100-foot ball of fire that showed up over a group of 10 nuclear missiles and shut them down is not a problem with national security? So it's a blatant lie. Well, then they said, well, the best thing we can do is, because we can't explain it, and I'll get into that in depth. They said the best thing we can do is let's do a public relations thing, and let's not panic the public, and we'll try to find out as much as we can. And then if we find out something simplistic, we'll share it. Well, of course, they had 17 years, and they couldn't come up with a simple answer because it's very complex, and we're being visited from somewhere, another dimension, another planet, another galaxy. So that's the problem. So imagine, Nick and Rob, if I told you that your job tomorrow is not electromechanical and your job isn't whatever it is, I'm going to tell you that you are now brain surgeons, and from now on, your job is to, do lobotomies.
Do I get to stay at a Holiday Inn Express tonight? Or
Yeah, right, and get a good night's sleep.
Yeah, right.
So it's the same thing with the Air Force, the Department of Defense. This thing showed up because we were blowing up nuclear bombs, and it showed up out west, and it showed up out there in Roswell because the 509th Bomb Group, the only nuclear-armed bomb group in the world, was out there, and all the nuclear stuff we were doing, and that's why it showed up in New Mexico. So
Makes too much sense.
Yeah, but I'm sorry if I'm making too much sense, and minds are blowing out there. So it's Friday night, have another good one on me, and just drive safely. But the problem is that now they had a problem they couldn't solve. And so the best thing to do is, okay, every day I get up and go, God bless it, I got a job that I can't do. Well, that was the Air Force's problem. What am I going to do? Well, the people who are paying my salary are going to go, we're paying you to solve this problem. So they're going to be beating my head. So it was a thankless, winless job. And that's why it went immediately from public investigation, to public relations. And that was its total shortfall.
It is. It's like essentially the whole entire thing is. It's like a fart in the wind. Honestly, they didn't have any idea what they were talking about. Like you said, it'd be like putting me and this guy in brain surgery tomorrow and saying, "Have at it, boys." But
well, let me share a little piece of inside information. A friend of mine got official records from Project Blue Book that never went through government hands. And the way he got them is a lieutenant who retired and was a Blue Book investigator left. He left his files in the garage that he was renting.
Oh, jeez.
And my friend eventually found those files, and he let me look at them.
He's not the guy on the news from a few weeks ago, was he? There was some guy from Dayton, that had like stacks and stacks of documents in his apartment.
Well, this guy was named Lieutenant Carmen Morano, and he actually left these documents in his garage, and I got to look at them because a local UFO investigator by the name of Rob Mercer got a hold of them. And I looked at the job description for Lieutenant Morano, and the job description did not say you are to investigate these sightings. The job description says you are being hired to explain these sightings.
Oh, geez.
And I have it in black and white. So right in their own paperwork, they said, no, there's no investigation. So there you have it. And very few people know that little factoid, but it's true, and I have a piece of paper that proves it.
We love smoking guns here.
I do too.
Yeah.
This is the kind of shit that's going to get us killed, Rob. This is the Hillary Clinton episode.
Right.
Clinton side.
Yeah. Clinton side.
Oh, man.
Now, in the book, you speak about there's a part you speak about having no conscious memories of actually putting your eyes on an extraterrestrial while speaking with an investigative journalist named Linda Howe. Do you think you possibly had experiences that could have been, we're going a little sci-fi here. You think you possibly had experiences that could have been erased from your memory much like the Men in Black tactics that you see in the popular movie that we've all seen.
Okay, well, it turns out that the Men in Black are less responsible for lost memories than the individual themselves or the people who have done the abduction. And what they do is there's a set of screen memories. For example, the person who gets abducted, they generally will only remember the first part and the last part. They'll remember a disturbance, a light, and maybe somebody standing in their room. Then the next thing they remember of this whole experience is being tossed back into bed or winding up with their pajamas inside out or something very strange.
It happens to me a lot.
Well, these are people who don't drink.
Okay.
So we're assuming these are sober people, and there's thousands of them. So the abductors themselves will create a screen memory by just that's called a staring procedure, and they'll get through the optic nerve, and it's kind of complicated, but they'll basically block the memory from the point where they were abducted to the time they were returned.
Like pinching a hose, like grabbing a hose.
Pinching a hose and keeping the water from flowing. That's a perfect analogy. Okay. I'm surprised.
Yeah. So, fourth grade reading level, but I can really put me around a garden hose and I know what I'm doing, all right?
Man, I did not know I was in the land of intellectual giants here tonight. So in one case, the abductors will put the screen memory in. In the other case, it's a traumatic experience that the person who's experiencing it will put in there because it'll make them feel better. They'll just go, it was an owl, it was a deer, that big-eyed creature I was looking at, and they'll put something in the place of that trauma. So it happens both ways. Now, the Men in Black typically, they'll harass civilians, but it usually won't get down to a drug-fueled interrogation until it's a military member, like the Rendlesham Forest incident.
Yep.
So the Men in Black are less responsible for lost memories than the actual extraterrestrials.
So, and to touch on the last part of what you're saying, is that something that you, as far as your research and whatnot, are you familiar with situations where the government has used drug induced interrogations or drug fueled interrogations?
Absolutely. There's three key players in the Rendlesham Forest incident, Ed Cabansag, Jim Peniston, and John Burroughs. And the fourth key player is Lieutenant Colonel Halt. And I have had a chance to talk to three of those individuals, including Colonel Halt. I've not had a chance to talk to Cabansag. And they have each told me that, Burroughs and Peniston were the guys that first saw the glowing UFO in Rendlesham Forest. Peniston was the guy who actually touched it, photographed it, and drew photos of it or drew sketches of it in his security forces notebook.
Okay.
So he had several interrogations, and they drugged him. When I talked to Colonel Halt, because I'd already talked to Peniston and Burroughs, and I interviewed Colonel Halt about that, and he said, yes, it's true. And I asked him if he knew anything about it. He said no, he did not find out anything about it till long after he had mustered out of the Air Force and told me, had I known about it, because he was deputy base commander, he said, had I known about it, people would have heard about it.
Sure.
He said, I would have done something. He said, but unfortunately, they kept it quiet from me. My guys were intimidated. They never brought it, to my attention. So, and it's in the book. It's in a couple of books already. So, they've done that.
Holy smokes. I need some of that stuff.
But I don't know. You say government. I don't know who's done it. I don't know.
We don't know who the government is.
Right. So, I mean, you can use it as a generalized term, but somebody did that to Burroughs and Peniston and Cabansag and a dozen of other folks while they were at Rendlesham. It was called Woodbridge Air Force Base.
And for some of our listeners may not be aware of what the Rendlesham Forest incident was. It occurred in the UK. Am I correct?
1980.
And it's their Roswell.
It's their Roswell.
On a much, I guess, I feel like the facts and data behind Rendlesham are much more, I guess, profound than the things that we discovered at Roswell.
Hands down.
Right.
Hands down. Roswell, or if you look at the Travis Walton case, there's much more evidence there.
Right.
Not a shred of metal has ever been identified from Roswell, and all the witnesses for the most part, were secondary or tertiary. But here in Rendlesham Forest, you had literally dozens of security forces. You had the deputy base commander, Lieutenant Colonel, who went out solely to put a stop to this. That's what he said, and they all came back saying, "We saw guys flying around the base. They were beaming. They were beaming lights." And the guy who was in charge of the nuclear weapons there, which is a top secret, no one's supposed to know that they had them, but guys eventually came out and said, yeah, they burned a hole through the storage area right down to the nuclear weapons. That's what happened at Woodbridge Royal Air Station.
Move along, nothing to see here, guys.
Yeah. So it's probably one of the best ever documented.
We got to raid Rendlesham, not Area 51. There's not shit there anymore. We need to go to Rendlesham. But you've been there, and
I have been there,
and you cover that in your book.
I do.
Your first book, your travels to, and there's some, like I said, there's some profound things that you go through in the book is in relation to Rendlesham Forest. So another plug for that book to go. Right.
By the way, it's Alien Shades of Grays.
Yes. Right. Now, do you feel, here comes some pretty, I told you we're going to get into some speculative questions. Do you feel like you were perhaps working among any extraterrestrials? Many theorists speak of them being very prevalent in our daily lives. Like some people believe that when you walk down the street, you are possibly walking past 4 or 5 hybrids or extraterrestrials. Do you feel like you were potentially amongst the, I guess you kind of covered that question earlier, that there was no one really that rubbed you that way, but do you think that we pass ETs and hybrids on a regular basis?
I do, and again, that's a good segue into book number 2. is the Victoria's Secret Truth is Victoria is a professional. She's been a CEO, vice president. She's been of companies. She's top salesperson, and her day-to-day thing, she's exceptional. She has multiple degrees. She speaks fluent Russian. How many people do you know speak fluent Russian?
Trump family.
Maybe Trump. Trump.
You said nothing was off limits.
That's right. So this is an exceptionally bright individual, and it wasn't until she got into her late 30s that she started to realize that I had an unusual childhood, and there's these things I want to explore. And it wasn't until she met me a couple of years ago that she actually became convinced that she has had these contact experiences. Now, she doesn't claim to be a hybrid, but there's history with her mother and the fact that her mother lost some children at childbirth that it's too deep to get into here. But when I asked her, outright, just recently, I said, do you think it's possible that you could be a hybrid? And she said, although I don't have any evidence of it, of course, I think it's possible with what's going on with me and my grandson and that type of thing. So if you read books like Walking Among Us by Dr. David Jacobs, he flat out says, I've been studying this for 30 years. There is a concerted hybridization program. There is a concerted indoctrination program and an integration program here. And you read his book and it makes common sense. And then I work with somebody like Victoria and I go, I'm working with somebody who I know is an experiencer for 50 years, and odds are she could be a hybrid.
Right.
Or her grandson could be a hybrid. So, yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think I remember hearing you talk about it on another show, and it was like something like it was a crazy conversation because I remember something going on the lines of someone remembering they were pregnant, and then like 6 weeks later, all of a sudden they just weren't.
Right. There's a book
multiple times.
It's by Bud Hopkins called Intruders, and it's and it talks about this lady who had multiple pregnancies, and you went to the gynecologist. Yeah, you're pregnant. And then, after a while, but the way it works is the theory, according to folks like John Mack and Bud Hopkins and Dr. Jacobs and others, is they'll take a human egg and sperm and they'll create an embryo, and then they need a place to gestate it for a couple of months. So they take that little fetus and they will put it into a human female and let it gestate for 30, 60, 90 days and then remove it. And then there have been reports of these fetuses being brought to term inside these jars filled with some kind of a serum. And this is not my research, but this is, research of guys who have the letters PhD after their names and made a career out of this.
Oh, man.
So, look at the time. Ray, we gotta go.
Why stop at a Liger, man? You know what I mean?
Right. Okay, well, we're back for our break here. We have a few more questions for Ray, and we then we're gonna wrap it up. We have some good stuff though. So don't take off just yet, because it's about to get good. The facts tell us the wreckage from Roswell was indeed brought to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Do you believe ET bodies were at any point ever moved to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base as on top of the wreckage itself?
I would think that if they brought them anywhere, Wright-Patterson would have been one of the best places to bring them. First of all, it had everything that they needed. They had a regional hospital, so they had medical personnel. They had supplies. They had contracts. They had security oaths. They had fences. They had guards. They had vaults. They had everything they possibly needed to examine those individuals. And they had world-class scientists. And if they didn't have that, they just whip up a quick contract and they would buy somebody. They'd bring them in for a day, a month, a week. So it would have been the place. Now, I got to tell you, I'm 1,000% sure that whatever was recovered in Roswell came to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Why? Because Jesse Marcel, who handled the stuff for the Air Force, he went out and fetched it out of the desert near Roswell. He said it was brought there, and he said so in an affidavit. And General Thomas Dubose, who was Chief of Staff of the 8th Army Air Corps, the office through which that material was flowing, and he handled it, he signed an affidavit that said the material went to Wright-Pat. So immutable, irrefutable data. I'm a little more squishy on the alien part of it because Dubose never mentions aliens. The guys that Jesse Marcel and the other intelligence officer, Sheraton Cavett, he never mentioned aliens. So, it's the Roswell Fire Department. It's some security people. It's residents of Roswell that are mentioning aliens. I don't really find that being tied to military testimony per se.
Okay.
So if they did have them, they would have brought him to Wright-Patterson, no doubt in my mind.
Well, Roswell aside, well, go ahead with your question.
I was going to say, and I don't remember thinking about it now. Did Mac Brazel ever comment on whether there was bodies?
He just talked about...
I remember the wreckage.
He talked about debris.
Yeah, because he found it on his ranch.
Yeah, he was actually on the Foster Ranch. People make so many mistakes. They go, it's in Roswell. No, it's not in Roswell.
It's like an hour or two away, isn't it?
Oh, it is. It's 70 miles northwest of Roswell on goat tracks.
Yeah.
And then you got to go north to come south because it's really tricky and there's private property and Bureau of Land Management. You can get shot out there. There's a lot of negatives. And even the pros, they go, yeah, it's 30 miles outside Roswell. Linda Moulton House said that on Ancient Aliens last week. No, Linda, it's not.
I Google mapped it and I'm like, why do they even call this the Roswell crash? Because it's not anywhere close.
Right.
It's near Corona. It's closer to Corona.
Yeah.
And Corona is a one-goat town, I'm telling you. I've been there. It's a one-goat town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is probably why they refer to it as Roswell, because that's town's
right.
so tiny.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the same thing with like Rachel, where Area 51.
Yeah.
I believe that's the little town by...
It is outside Area 51.
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
And aside from, I guess, the Roswell incident, are there any situations familiar to you where you think the U.S. government would have had a live or deceased extraterrestrial in their possession? Any occurrences that have happened? I guess Rendlesham America was involved, but in your opinion, do you think there's any situations where the U.S. government would have had ETs in their possession?
I think there are many possibilities. First, there's the Roswell situation. Then there's the claim that there was a similar crash on the same day. Perhaps the two craft came together. One crashed on the plains of San Agustin outside Daddle, New Mexico, and that puts it west of White Sands Missile Range. And there's a gentleman there by the name of Gerald Anderson. Gerald's now in his late 70s, and as a 5-year-old, he has memories of being with his father hunting a creek bed for agates, and they came across a crash saucer. And Gerald has passed multiple lie detector tests. Wow. He was interviewed by the late Stanton Friedman, and Gerald said, yes, we saw living and dead aliens, and eventually the Army showed up and took them away. Then there's the Aztec crash. Then there's also the Kingman crash, and there's a lot of documentation there that indicates that there were occupants of those crafts. So many possibilities. I've not really researched heavily the living alien, dead alien parts of this. So I'd say certainly it's a possibility.
Oh man, I hope so.
And I love the movie Paul, by the way.
And see, this is we don't have this written down. This is kind of just something that I've always been curious of, is because the way that I see it, there's nothing more that I would like to believe that there's aliens and that we've came in contact with them, or they've came in contact with us, I should say. The only doubt that I ever had in my mind is the fact that I would not understand why they would ever come here. In your mind, and you're like, if you were to say, one or two things, what reason across, infinite galaxies do you think that would draw them to our planet?
Well, one, they could have been here first.
Okay.
And there are drawings there that indicate that's a possibility.
That's true. Yeah.
Two, we have a lot of natural resources that they might need. Water comes to mind first. I just watched a documentary about lakes that are disappearing at altitude in Chile. And NASA even wrote a paper about one, that this lake was 32 miles long and I don't know how many miles wide, and it literally disappeared. And another one where guys are witnessing UFOs going in and out, it has dropped several feet, and now it looks like it's starting to disappear. Now, it also appears that with this breeding program that were necessary as part of the breeding program, either to make us better or the fact that they can no longer breed and they're using us to keep their genetics alive. And so they put the genes, they spin them off to us, and eventually we might become them again. They could be here for 1 million years. Their technology is 1 million years ahead of ours.
Very
so
true.
I think there's a whole lot of reasons. It's not just to, scare us at Halloween.
And that's another thing that I was thinking of earlier whenever I was listening, because there was the show I was listening to here, there was a lot of reverse engineering talking. I was thinking about it. I'm like, well, we're reverse engineering these spacecrafts, which have, crashed or whatever. First off, these extraterrestrials are horrible drivers because they're always crashing everywhere. But just the thought of reverse engineering and, I can't picture an alien sitting there with a screwdriver, screwing in screws, like putting these pieces together. So, there had to have been at some point in time, if we were reverse engineering and like rebuilding these things, that we would have had to have create our own type of tools or, some type of means to take these things apart and put them back together. Because I highly doubt they're going to be using the same type of like utensils that we would use.
An Allen wrench.
Yeah, right.
If you think about it, let's say that we picked up something in 1947. Well, we didn't have a lot of the equipment that we needed to do perhaps elemental analysis or isotopic analysis of a piece of metal to tell us what the composition is or what the isotopic ratios are of the different metals that are in there. We can get into that in just a second. So now as technology goes on, or let's say pre-X-rays, before the X-ray machine, we might not be able to detect an implant that was put up somebody's nostril by an alien. But as time goes on and we improve our technologies, now we can understand more and more what it is we got, what we've recovered. And yes, we can reverse it and we can exploit it and we can spin it off commercially. We can spin it off militarily. It just depends. So we're not smart enough. We're probably in the Stone Age with the tools we have to understand what they have, but we're gaining on it, and we're gaining on it rapidly.
And I'm sure if you have the material there, it's a lot easier to maybe construct something that could
Guess what kind of screwdriver you need?
Yeah, to guess what kind of screwdriver. Right.
Do you think, as far as experimental research at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, do you think the UFO research that was allegedly performed there after Roswell, and I guess maybe not so much Project Blue Book, but the alleged UFO research that's been performed there, do you think that's the most extreme research activity that's ever occurred there? I guess for, just the shock value of it all.
Well, let's look at some of the things that were in evidence. Several years ago, they dug ground to put in a new fire station. And when they broke ground and dug deep, they found 2,306 bomblets, gas-filled bomblets.
At Wright-Pat?
At Wright-Pat, right off of Loop Road, right across from Building 620.
That'd have blown all of us to smithereens.
Now, they were chemical warfare bomblets, and most of them were inert, but several were not inert, and they had to be taken away. They still contained enough traces of a chemical warfare. Now, on the golf course, I know you're a golfer, on the fourth hole of Twin Base Golf Course, there used to be these serpentine mounds. And as a young golfer, I always thought, well, this is cool. It's kind of like an ode to the Scottish design. It turns out those mounds were filled with barrels of toxic chemicals. And it took the EPA 3 years to remediate that area.
Oh, my gosh.
Okay, then they found that they had spilled 1 million gallons of fuel from the propulsion lab right into Mother Earth, down a drain. Yeah. Okay, so you talk about dangerous and unusual and whatever. I just gave you 3 very simple examples, and those are only 3 that were made public.
Yeah.
Let your imagination run wild of all the stuff that is classified.
Jeez. Just imagine that place caught on fire and just burned the whole entire state down.
And more.
And more. Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to skip past this question because you've kind of already touched on all this, but one theory you briefly touched on is there were 2 UFOs that crashed at Roswell, which is a new theory to us, and that's the first I heard of it was reading your book. Are you under the belief that there was indeed 2 wreckage sites at Roswell, associated with Roswell?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at the patterns of the craft as they were entering that vicinity, based on witness reports and all the activity that was seen in the sky by other witnesses, including the second crash site is what's called the Plains of San Agustin, and it's west of Daddle, New Mexico. It's in the high desert. It's a godforsaken place, but it's beautiful.
Is this where Art Campbell covered
Art Campbell wrote the book, Finding the UFO Crash on the Plains of San Agustin, and Art was a friend of mine.
And you kind of went through a story in the beginning, but you can touch on that now if you'd like, about the metals that you were going to attempt to get tested at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Yeah,
Art and Chuck Wade went out there, and they took Gerald Anderson, and Gerald showed him exactly where the craft crashed. And they had been out there for maybe a decade prior to that without Gerald, and they were just using some loose documentation. And Gerald goes, "Let me show you." And those guys weren't finding anything. And Gerald goes, "And by the way, you're just digging in the blind. Did anyone bring a metal detector?" And Gerald goes, "I did." So he whips out this metal detector, and within an hour, they're finding all these metals. So they had them tested 3 times. Art and Chuck's metallurgist, it was led by a guy by the name of Steve Coburn. The results came back that the isotopic ratios were not of planet Earth.
Fantastic.
And I'll explain what that means. Then 2 other independent, MUFON of Ohio did it, and they took it to Cleveland State University. And I won't reveal the professor's name, but he did the testing, and it came out as terrestrial. Well, I got a hold of the reports, and I found some what we shall call inconsistencies in the way that the testing was done. And even though he didn't want to go on record, the guy told me, yes, there were some possibilities here that my test results are not accurate. Now, MUFON,
fantastic scientists,
right?
I love those guys, but they're holding fast to nothing is wrong with our results, and now they won't talk to me about it. I have nothing against them. They're a great organization, but in this case, I think mistakes were made.
Sure.
Now, there's also another person who was, unfortunately, also MUFON connected, and his name was Antonio Paris, and he is a now disavowed member of MUFON because they didn't like what he was doing, and I guess he wasn't following protocol. He also claimed to have had the materials tested, and they were tested as terrestrial. So what we've got here is we've got 3 votes, but it's like 2 of them don't count. One, you've got irregularities in the testing that the guy who tested it admitted to. Another guy had an agenda, and that's questionable. And the other one needs some more investigation. So the jury's out, and I think Art's passed, but Chuck has agreed to let me get some of the samples and get them tested when I'm ready. I'm just not ready yet.
Okay.
Maybe in a couple years. I just don't want to do that yet.
And in the book, you spoke about speaking to people that were associated, high-ranking government officials that you would take this stuff to present it for testing. Am I correct? And they said Well, I'll let you tell the story.
Two
because
former members of the senior executive service who each at one time led a laboratory for the Air Force got involved. One was my direct boss at one time during my career, and I approached him and said, hey, I've got a friend who claims this metal came from a crash site on the plains of San Augustine, and he'd like to get him tested by the Air Force. And the gentleman laughed. He goes, you know what? I'm interested. We'll see. So he contacted a guy who was the head of the materials lab at one time. And that guy said, yea, verily, let's go see if we can get something done.
Now, this is passing over a lot of people's head, but the fact these people are like, yeah, let's try it. It tells me that in their minds, they're thinking, okay, something did happen there.
There's a possibility.
And for them to not just completely refute you and say, get the hell out of here. That's not what happened. They said, we're all ears. We're listening. We want to possibly see this stuff.
And one of them borrowed my copy of Art's book.
Oh, really?
So he read through it, and at least I think he read through it. And so they pushed it forward. And what they did is they went to the head of the appropriate laboratory and said, hey, look, we've got this interesting metal you might want to test. And they gave him a little bit of background. And rather than just being laughed outright out of the lab, the guy said, we are so booked with official stuff, we couldn't get to it for a couple of years, and you'd actually have to pay us. And so there'd have to be some channels set up, and we were not an official agency.
Right.
So unless we were to sneak it in the back door of another agency, we were kind of dead in the water. But the mere fact that those two individuals did not laugh me out of the room, and the guy they contacted didn't laugh, that says a lot.
It does. It speaks volumes.
Big time.
Now we're going to jump to more of I guess, modern times right here. What's going on in the media present day? A lot of people have seen the Bob Lazar documentary on Netflix, and they watched the Bob Lazar special on the Joe Rogan show. In your opinion, what do you think he's going through right now?
Living hell.
I bet. Yeah.
Living hell.
Yeah.
I've seen Bob a couple of times live. He was with George Knapp at conferences. And I haven't seen the documentary. I did get to talk to Jeremy Corbell, who did the movie at length in March. I was a presenter along with Jeremy at a conference in Laughlin, Nevada. And so at the bar, all the speakers gather and we chit chat. So, got to chat with him at length, and also talked to George a little bit, and was there at their question and answer, and they answered some questions I had. Yeah. I think Bob, I will not make up your mind for you. I don't want to change your beliefs, but here's the situation. Bob Lazar said, there's an Area 51, and within this Area 51 is S4. And his employer said, and the government said, there is no Area 51. There was never an S4. Then what happened is there was a lawsuit about the chemical burnings and stuff on those high-tech airplane projects and all these cancers, and the government finally had to admit, because of all the lawsuits, we have an Area 51. Okay, so Bob Lazar was right.
Yes.
Then Bob Lazar said, I worked in a place called S4. No, you never worked here. Bob Lazar produced a pay stub that said exactly who he worked for and where he worked. Now, 2 decades ago, Bob Lazar said there's an element 115.
There we go.
Scientists around the world said, Bob Lazar is cuckoo, and there is no thing as element 115. What did we just find out? They just synthesized element 115, and it was in existence, and they talked about what properties it might behold if it was stabilized. Bob Lazar was right again, and I'm saying to myself, now chills. I'm getting, this is getting scary.
Yes.
So if Bob Lazar was right about Area 51, S4, his employers, element 115, what else is he right about? Is he correct about reverse engineering the sport model?
Yeah.
Plus, he took those guys out to the desert and said, look up over that fence. There's going to be a glowing object floating around this date, this hour.
He knew the day, the time. Yeah.
Bob Lazar was right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you have to watch the documentary.
The documentary is crazy.
He's so matter of fact about everything.
That's the thing. Like going into before the Joe Rogan interview, because I think they did the interview and right before the special came out.
Yeah.
You can take it as you want. They try to refute his education, his employment history.
They tried to erase him.
They tried to erase him pretty much. And there's things that he talked about back in the 80s, specifically with your question earlier about if there was different different ways you could get into certain facilities at Wright-Pat, that there's this one thing that he was talking about where you put your hand on this with the little spike things and it reads like your bone density or something. That's how it identifies you. And then he shows him a picture of that same exact thing that they said, never existed.
Right.
And he was like, no, this is it.
I love it. So I in my opinion, I was thinking, but he seems like it's a pain in his ass to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because most people that want to get their story out there, in a situation, I guess something similar, they're so over the top and just, and he's just like,
he's very matter of fact.
It seems like it hurts his ass to talk about what the things that he's dealt with in his life.
I don't think people really figured out why he did this, but I think one night watching the Perseids meteorites or something and having a favorite glass of wine, I was thinking about Bob Lazar. I know that's strange. And I was thinking, why did he do that? Now, here's why I think he did this, why he came out. He thought, here's what's going to happen. Even though he got a little paranoid. And he said, I think what's going to happen is this. They're going to let me come to and fro here, and I'm going to figure this out, and I'm going to get this thing running. Then I'm going to write a tech report, and they're not going to need me anymore, and they're going to take me to the desert, and they're going to kill me.
Holy shit. Yeah.
And I think that was his logic chain. And he he even said, but he never said those exact words, but he said, I feared for my life. And I think that was the thinking that he had.
And it makes sense.
And if you think about it, here's the only thing that worries me about Bob, and that's a small thing. And you talked about erasure. Bob said, I went to school at MIT, I went to school at Caltech, and I did these other things, and they couldn't find records. Now, I'm not saying that he didn't go or that sort of thing, but look I have every report card I ever got from first grade. If I went to MIT and I went to Caltech, you're going to get a piece of paper. You're going to get a piece of paper with your grades on it. Even if you withdraw, because you've paid tuition, it's going to tell you what the refund is and what, you're going to have a piece of paper. Now, unless they wound up stealing every piece of paper he got from MIT and other universities,
which is not completely out of reach here for
no, but I'm just saying that's the only part that ever bothered me about him. It's like I can understand maybe he embellished his credentials, but what does he do for a living? He runs a nuclear company.
Yeah. That doesn't just happen overnight.
He built rocket cars for in his spare time. Well, I couldn't do that. Nick couldn't do that.
I could give it hell though. I would give it hell, Ray. I promise.
He obviously knows his stuff and had to have learned it somewhere. And the government's not just going to hire you as because you're just some random guy off the street.
Builds rocket ship cars.
Yeah.
And what was the FBI raid part of the documentary?
Yes, it was.
Okay. It happened as the documentary was going on. As they talked about Element 115.
It's so sketchy. He says, "I can't
he
talk
asked
to you."
he asked them if he has any of it, and then he's like, I can't really talk about that. And then the next day.
And the night before in the production tent, the guys are going, how can we get the FBI here? And Bob goes, let's talk about Element 115. This thing will be a smash hit.
It'll be here in a jiff.
It's a great documentary.
I got to see it. I can't wait.
Also in the media, there's the Storm Area 51 movement that's going on right now. just for, I guess,
why not?
Shits and giggles here. What do you think? What do you think is going to happen here? What do you think is going to happen to these people if they attempt to start, I guess, climbing the fences at Area 51? Or do you think they would find anything if they got over the fence into the?
Well, I think that here's what's going to happen. First of all, Americans like to, we're going to party.
Yeah.
What's going to happen is none of them is going to get 10 feet past the little alien inn.
Yep.
Some guy with a pipe starts smoking. Free beers are flowing. They're going to open up the taps, and it's going to be a spontaneous Woodstock.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I just hope that everybody, first of all, don't go. It's the
Right.
it's the mother of all bad ideas.
Yeah.
Unless you like
definitely.
to sponsor Rob and I to go.
We talked about that doing a radio show right there outside the little alien in there.
But if you happen to drive through several states where ganja is now legal and you can't help yourself, take supplies out the wazoo. If you're gone for 3 days, take 2 weeks of supplies, okay?
Yeah.
Enough for you and every living man and child that you're going to find out there. But don't do it. It's the mother of all bad ideas.
Yeah.
We talked about it a little bit, and I said that, I think there'll be a lot of people that show up. I think there will be maybe a quarter of those that go out to where the sign is, where you can see the sniper guys in the truck on the cliff, and that's probably as far as anybody's even going to attempt to go.
Oh, they'll put a sonic weapon out there. They'll put something that's non-destructive, but people will be stopped in their tracks.
I have a friend who's Army Reserves, but he's constantly going places and doing. I work with him, and I was asking him about it. I'm laughing. He's just sitting there staring at his phone, not laughing, and he just shook his head. So matter of fact, he's like, if they do anything, the people there are going to make everyone trying to climb the fence shit their pants. It's like, what do you mean? He's like, the government has stuff that they can just
They're going to get close enough,
push the button and make everyone
a dragon's
pass
just going to fly out.
and just go to the bathroom themselves.
There are sensors. They're 90 miles out. I mean, they'll know you're coming before you even think about going. So don't do it. It's a very bad idea. Nothing but bad can happen to you. The best thing you can do is fly into Vegas and party and stay there.
Hell yeah.
Stay in Vegas.
Now let's touch on your Men in Black encounters that you experienced while you're on the golf course there at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It's kind of one of the best parts about this book that I can't read. So Ray put a lot of pictures in this book, as you can see, which is
over 100 previously unpublished photographs.
Yes, so
That's
there's
awesome.
a lot of incredible pictures that go along with the research that he's putting forth in this book. So that's one of my favorite parts, and I will let you elaborate on your encounter with the Men in Black there at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Yes. Golf hole number 10 on the Prairie Trace Golf Course parallels the campus of NASIC, formerly Foreign Technology Division, formerly the home of Project Blue Book. So Men in Black, we won't get into who they are, what they do, but Men in Black have been associated with the obfuscation of UFO facts. They're the guys who go out and steal the photographs or try to cover up a scene or some landing site and remove the evidence. And so I've always thought that they got to stay somewhere. They got to hang out somewhere during the day.
Yeah.
And why not hang out at the building where you would expect them to be, because that's where Project Blue Book was housed for almost 20 years. So one day I'm tootling down in the cart, and I was going to go over and take a snapshot of the cemetery that's there, and eventually wound up in my book.
Yep.
Because I was theorizing where would they hide the aliens. I thought, well, this is a great place. There's a cemetery right there. There's where the home of Project Blue Book was. Why not just walk 20 feet and drop them in the ground, literally next to your building?
It would make perfect sense.
And it's 24-hour surveillance.
Yeah.
So I'm trundling along, and I look up, and there's a guy it's mid-May, and if you're in Dayton, Ohio in mid-May, it can get hot and humid, and it was 80 degrees, and this guy's in a dark suit and a dark tie, dark everything, and he's got a hat on. Nobody wears a hat in Dayton, Ohio, friends, except for Nick here, and he's wearing a thing backwards. But that's
no bangles.
He's got a bangle. Well, he's shamed.
Yes, very shamed.
He's shamed.
Nick's a hat guy, so yeah.
They're known as the bungles, but anyway. So I wind up having a conversation with this guy, and in fact, I had 2 conversations over the course of 30 days. I saw him again about 4 weeks later, and
He's just standing there.
He's reading. Well, inside the building, you can't take any smartphones or anything. So when you go into that building, there's lockers, and you got to check. Anything electronic has to be checked. So if he wants to check his personal email, he has to leave the building.
Gotcha.
So he's out in the shade, and he's catching the smoke, and he's doing this stuff. And I get into a conversation with him, and I bring up the subject of Men in Black. I just can't resist because he looks like a man in black.
Balls of steel.
Yeah.
Big brass balls.
As Bruce Springsteen said, "Big balls, Willie." Yeah, when Bruce does his next song, I'm going to be in it. So I go up to this guy and I mention, I can't help but ask this, but you're standing next to the Foreign Technology Division where Blue Book was. You're dressed like this, and quite frankly, you look like a man in black. And so what he does is he removes his hat to show me that he was bald, and I think he's trying to tell me, well, the reason I have this hat on is because I don't look so good with my hat off. But when he does it, he only makes it look worse because he's shaved close, and he's got this dark olive complexion.
Oh, God.
So he even, he's got a very unusual tan. And I told the very first radio show I was on, I described it to Mac Maloney. And from the background, his producer goes, "He must have been an Italian." He goes, "So your alien was an Italian." And so we have this conversation, and he tells me that he's not MIB. And I said, "Well, look, I'm going to be writing this book, and I'd like to take a picture." He goes, "Well, why would you do that?" And I said, "Because I could make some money if I put a picture of a man in black in a book." He said, "There aren't any." Right. And then he goes, "No, we can't do that in this environment." And he points to the building, meaning this is highly classified, and
Sure.
I can't do that. So somehow, somewhere, a very small photograph of this person in profile is in the book. Yes. So it's one of the few places where you'll find a picture of a man in black, but you can't identify him, but you certainly can identify the clothes he's wearing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
It's very clear that the photograph was taken in such a way that he can't personally be identified, but that dude is wearing some strange clothes.
Yeah, for where he's at and the time of year and just kind of hanging out. But do you...
And then I had a second episode of actually a third. I was in a local eatery, and
this is not in the book.
This is not in the book.
Okay, you're right.
I was in a local eatery, and there was a gentleman dressed clearly as a man in black. He kept glancing over at my table. This place has a long bar that can be seated on each side, and he had his back to me, but he was using his telephone to hold it in my direction in selfie mode, and then he could look down to his telephone and he could see what I was doing.
Yeah.
So he was tracking me, and then I saw him take photographs.
Okay.
So I accosted him, and he tried to explain it. He was a fundraiser for a certain company, and I determined later that indeed was not the case.
Wow.
But while he looked away and stopped surveilling me, I took several of your pictures, and they're going in book 3, so you didn't get away with it.
Super.
So it's announced here for the first time. You're going down.
I love it. Probably you have 2 sons, right?
Yes, I do.
It's probably one of them putting one of their friends up to something.
My sons are much smarter than that. They're much smarter than that.
Now, there was also one day when you were coming back from physical. I think you were currently employed at the base, or was it after?
It was after my retirement.
Okay, and you were coming home from physical therapy by Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and this was your most, I guess, profound sighting of a UFO yourself. I think you've said this is the only UFO sighting that you've experienced in your entire life.
Close up.
Okay. Tell us about that experience.
I had a traffic accident in 2010. Unfortunately, a young man ran a red light. I hit him. Then the truck that was behind me hit my car and turned my Accord into an accordion. So I wound up with a herniated disc in my neck, and it was pressing on the nerves, and it had me. I was on Vicodins and Percodans and Percocets and all that for several months, waiting for surgery.
No way to live.
No, and I realized that happened 16th of November, 2010. I realized by early February that I was no longer going to be able to work because I was on a program that was doing flight testing, and we were going out for 2-3 weeks at a time and that kind of thing. So I had put in for my retirement and waiting for surgery, which I didn't have because I had a very smart surgeon. And he said, "You're young, you're in shape, and I think the swelling will go down and we won't have to go in there." And I still have to be careful So after I was allowed to, I started to do therapy, and I was going southbound on Fairfield Road, and I was approaching the intersection of Kemp and North Fairfield, and I looked up. So that would have been looking in the southwest direction. And what had happened is I had a moonroof in my car, and the shade was pulled back. And a lot of times, you'll get a local airplane flying over, and it'll break the light pattern, and you'll see it across your dashboard or whatever, your steering wheel. And something like that happened, and I could tell that the object was going from behind me over my head forward. And I thought, well, that's strange because it's a huge shadow, so it's probably low, and it's not making any noise. And as I was trying to simultaneously brake my car and look through the window and make sure I didn't hit the cars that were stopping in front of me, I lowered my head and I could look through the windshield, and I got about a 7-second look of a craft, which I eventually determined was about 90 feet across and was scalloped on the top and the bottom.
Right.
And you can tell I'm a product of my growing up because it had these gigantic red lights. And you would have thought I would have said to myself, holy crap, that's a UFO. But growing up in Detroit, I go, man, that looks like the back end of a Chevy. Because I had those cat eyes, those giant cat eye things. And so it just, it was one of those days where the clouds were about 75 feet off the deck, just above the 2-story building. And it just slipped in, and it disappeared. So,
wow. And there's a diagram in your book, just something you drew up of what it looked like, what it appeared to you that day. That's also in the book there.
Yeah, not only that, but I went home and I drew a map. I looked on the map and I estimated what direction the craft was moving in. So I drew a line through it to see where it was heading and where it had come from. If it had gone on the path that I drew the line on, it would have gone right over the middle of the busiest runway at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Do you think if it was an extraterrestrial craft, what business do you think it would have had at Wright-Patterson Air Force? It's not necessarily a nuclear hotspot. I don't.
It was at one time. It stored nuclear weapons.
Okay,
and there is a former nuclear reactor that has been buried under concrete and such, and there's still nuclear waste in there. There may be small nuclear elements that they use in certain research. They're little tiny specks of nuclear radioactive, but there was a former depot filled with nuclear weapons at Wright-Pat, so why not check to see if the stockpile's still there?
Yeah.
Or it very well could have been one of those, reverse engineered pieces that's part of the secret
Let's see if we can get this thing up in the air.
Yeah, secret aircraft program.
That was not one of ours. And if it is one of ours, we should point it out to the world and go, if you mess with us, this is what you're going to get.
You would think
you're
that.
A 63 Chevy right up your ass. Now this is touching on, this is something that happened more recently where I like this narrative that we're talking about right now. So almost a year to the day, it's going to be August 2nd of 2018. This is the 88th Air Base Wing held an active shooter exercise at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Unbeknownst to them, the 88th Medical Group was holding a separate mass casualty drill, which included treating airmen with simulated wounds. Sorry, I lost my spot altogether right here. Treating airmen with simulated wounds, according to an executive summary of the investigation. When a jogger who was actually hurt, allegedly hurt, who was screaming and crying from his injuries, arrived at the ER at the same time as role players from the mass casualty drill. A confused caller told the base operator that an active shooter was on the loose and the hospital was locked down, the investigation says. That prompted someone else to call 911. Things became even more confused when a security force's airman decided to take the initiative and breach a locked door with his M4, causing more people to dial 911, according to the investigation. Colonel Thomas Sherman of the 88th Air Base Wing commander said the misunderstanding that day stemmed from a, quote, a convergence of multiple events that were taking place at the exact same time. So whenever all this stuff happened,
falling everywhere.
I'm like, they're out. They got out of their cages. They're messing everything up.
Someone got out of the door.
They want the candy bars. They're hungry. Have you Are you in tune with this incident at all? Have you kept your eyes on this incident very much, or
the only thing I did was read the report in the Skywriter. That's it. That's what I read, and I'm familiar enough now with it and hearing what you said.
Okay, so like when I heard the story, it goes back to one of these guys, these airmen that told me they worked below ground and they were told to shoot and kill anything that came out. I'm thinking these damn things got out.
I got out. Yeah.
And I didn't know if there was possibly anything that you had kind of heard in your circles that this was possibly more than what it was. I guess what it was put out to the media as was a giant miscommunication, or I guess a.
Well, you think about it. They have 25,000 people out there. So when they're running a drill like this, and you want to get the word out to everybody, and they try to do that, you have a minimum of 25,000 things that can go wrong. So they have a set of procedures, and it's impossible to write a procedure that covers all 25,000 possibilities. And as I understand, it was a perfect storm of mistakes where the protocols that were in place, people went off script, and when that happens, now you have a real world situation. Now you've got to tell people it's real world. So my understanding is mistakes were made. They reviewed the procedures. They're doing their best to correct that. And part of it is, that old movie, I think we have a failure to communicate. Okay. That's exactly what happened here. So, they need to double check, and then only then go off and run these kind of drills.
And that's what you think happened as well.
Well, that's all I know because it's all I read, and I can't expect really anything else.
I definitely think something got loose. In my mind, something got out or got loose, and they had to put it out.
They had to old yeller it.
Yeah, for sure.
You never know.
You never know.
It's a lot funner to think of that way. You know what I mean? It's more interesting, but
it's a lot of fun to think.
At the same time, it's also terrifying.
Now, also, there's a lot of talks in the media recently of full disclosure, and you talk about this in some of your other shows. Do you think we are close to full disclosure? And when I say full disclosure, I mean the government coming forward and saying, yes, there's aliens. Yes, there's UFOs. We don't know what exactly our plan is right now, but yes, this stuff exists.
Or even on that note, do you think we are even ready for it?
Well, who wants to be the president that says, folks, over 1 million of you have had contact. You all been abducted. Many of you are part of a breeding program. Some of you are already hybridized. There's programs where you've been introduced to your future husband when you were a child. They were both abducted, brought together. You didn't know it. We eventually brought you, together as adults, and we're totally interfering with all of mankind. We're stealing your resources. Which president wants to go to the podium and say that, huh? Imagine, and the press secretary, they'll be looking for a new job. There's only so many jobs at Fox, okay?
Right.
So I don't think anybody really wants to do that because it's a situation that they still don't understand. There is no cure for it. So right. I don't think disclosure is imminent. In my book. And then to answer your question, Rob, I don't think we're ready for it. I really don't. I mean, we've got enough we got to go to the store, we got groceries, we got gasoline prices, we've got taxes, we've got,
worry about the aliens.
We've got shooters, we got hurricanes coming through here. Now we're going to get, this recognition anxiety where you can play it off. Okay, it's not going to happen to me. Fine, blah, 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 blah. So I don't have to deal with it. I'm calm. Now, it's in your face, and now you got to deal with it. Who wants to do that to the population of planet Earth? I don't think so.
I have a pretty good idea of someone who would want to do it.
Yeah, dude, I'm sure they're a Democrat. Sorry,
I mean, personally, I think
political.
If I think someone from the government, say if a president came out and was like, there's 100%, there's other life forms on this planet.
No,
it's need to know. You know what I mean? It's one of those things that's need to know. So they don't. Even like Clinton, I think Carter tried to. All the presidents tried to, and it's like it's a need to know. You don't need to know. So oh well. But I mean, I think I'm just, if somebody was telling me that and like definitively giving me the answers, me personally, I'd be like, oh, I kind of figured that.
Yeah,
but
I already knew
you,
that,
you know, you're
dude.
going to get the people that are going to be crazy. They're all of a sudden, you know, they're going to be living at church and trying to pray the aliens away. And I mean, it's, you never know how people are going to react in that circumstance. It's,
You and I touched earlier on, we kind of had the same question on here, so I'll let you present that question.
yeah, this was my main thing that I wanted to take away from this, and then I kind of wanted to pick your brain on a little bit. Is that at any time going through your research and putting out these books and doing talks, have you ever or do you ever question your own safety?
I would say only from the people that I've met in the dark. In other words, nobody from the FBI has come and knock on the door and go, Ray, you got to stop this.
Knock
Right.
the shit off, Ray.
That has never happened. You know, I've except for one guy who we talked about offline who was involved himself in
Sure.
we're not going to mention his name, who was involved himself in an abduction scenario. You know, it's gone a little sideways, but for the most part, everyone's been really supportive, especially the researchers.
Okay.
Very, very well-known people. My former coworkers have been fine with me. I still have good relations with guys in the public affairs office. We've dealt with all of this stuff in good humor. In fact, I will let you know that the Travel Channel is going to be here next week, and they're going to film me for an upcoming episode of a new TV show.
Okay.
That's great.
And it's not going to be filmed at Wright-Pat, but we had to deal with the Wright-Patterson office, and they were chilly with it.
Oh, that's good.
So,
Awesome.
the time I think I came closest is when I was in Exeter. And I described this in book 1, and I was at the site of the Norman Muscarello 1965 UFO sighting.
This is the New Hampshire.
In New Hampshire.
Okay.
And I wanted to kind of get the ambiance of what it was like in 65 in September when it was a moonless night, and he was out there trying to hitchhike, and he saw this 90-foot thing that he called it. And I was parked, the window was rolled down, it was a beautiful night, and suddenly I hear a disembodied female voice talking to me through the driver's window. And I'm going, how did they get here? I don't understand this.
Yeah.
It's pitch black. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. And it's very casual. This female voice goes, hi. So I go, I'm thinking, mother. I go, hi. And they said, what are you doing here? So I quickly try to explain my name, and I'm investigating this Exeter case, and I wanted to see what it was like. And I go through all this stuff. And they go, they're not coming back. There's nothing here for you to see. You need to leave.
So just like skip past all the other stuff they could have said, like, oh, where are you from? They just go straight to, they're not coming back.
They're not coming back. There's nothing here for you to see. You should leave. And so I thought, well, maybe they didn't hear me the first time. So I repeat the whole scenario. My name's Raymond Szymanski. I'm an investigator, and I'm doing this Norman Muscarello follow-up and blah, blah, blah. And they go, they're not coming back. There's nothing here for you to see. You need to leave. So I'm thinking, well, I didn't come all this way just to lay up in golf, right? I'm gonna take the shot. So I thought I'd roll the dice just once. And
Get out of your car and fight me.
No, here's what I'm thinking. It's the middle of the night. It's dark. I can't see them. They can't see me, but it's a woman. And she has ventured out in my playground, and she's threatening me. So I don't know, is she going to jump and tear my face off? Does she have a pistol? Does she have a knife? Does she have people waiting, in a tree line that I can't see?
Yeah.
So I thought, I'm going to roll the dice just once, and I go, and try not to be a smart ass. I go, well, what makes you think they're not coming back? Like, you got a hotline to them. They call you, hey, Alice, we're not coming back again this week, okay?
Yeah.
So if anyone shows up, just tell them we're not coming back.
I need their card when you get a chance.
Yeah. So she says like the same thing, you need to leave, et cetera. So, I'm a pretty tough guy. I grew up on the streets of Detroit. I have 5 brothers, a sister. So, you know what I did?
You left.
I got my skinny Detroit ass out of there as fast as I could because I had no idea what her backup plan was.
Yeah.
So then she says, okay, good night. I said, thank you. I'm leaving.
I'm leaving.
Well, I was wedged between a tree and this equipment they had parked there because they were left this 25-foot Komatsu front loader there, and I couldn't move
Conveniently.
So I'm trapped, and so I don't know. The road was tree lined and was only a lane and a half. So when they left, I don't know how they got out of there. If they was in a vehicle, no headlights ever came on. I never heard a car leave. And I got my skinny Detroit butt out of there. I said, this can wait for another night.
I can't say I blame you at all.
So that was, I think, as close as I came to being like threatened.
Okay.
But I've never had, trench coat guys come up and, no warnings. Nobody's throwing bricks through my window or anything like that. It just hasn't happened.
Oh, thank God.
That's good.
Thank God. Trust me, there's a huge line in front of me of researchers they need to get first. And I'll name them if you're interested.
Yeah. Call me. So for our last question here in closing, just like I said, you can speculate here if you would like. As far as one thing my wife always compliments me on is my gut feeling. When I get a gut feeling about someone or something, it's a certain situation, 8 out of 10 times, my gut feeling is usually correct. And I'm sure you've had a lot of intuitions and gut feelings throughout your research and all the things that you've done throughout your entire life up to this point. And like I said, sometimes these gut feelings are accurate. Is there anything wild that you've speculated about Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, or I guess anything related to this situation in general that you haven't necessarily put out there because, it's like throwing crap against the wall or whatever? Is there anything that you have maybe had a hunch about and kind of kept to yourself and been like, I think this is going on, or I think this happened, but I'm not putting it out there because it would sound too crazy. It would make me sound like one of those guys that, everybody talks about that says is the crazy person.
Okay. That's a good question. And I'll try to answer it the best I can.
Okay.
First of all, I wrote 2 books about UFOs and extraterrestrials.
Sure.
I found the best witnesses in the world. The Rendlesham case is probably as strong of a case as there is, and I've had a chance to talk to 3 of the 4 principal people. Travis Walton case is one of the top 2 cases ever. He had 6 witnesses. Yep. They all passed multiple lie detector tests. I spent an afternoon with Travis Walton. I got to ask him anything I wanted to.
Yeah.
Okay. I talked to the guy who owned the house over which the Norman Muscarello UFO floated. I heard his personal story, and I talked to other witnesses from the area. So all of that is first person, and they all had remarkable stories, but they're all as well documented as possible. So, the guy who was in charge of the nuclear weapons said, dude, they burned a hole in the weapons storage area. I mean, how much further do you need to go? Colonel Halt said they beamed light at our feet. One UFO came at us, split into 5, and went everywhere. We had 24 security forces out there. We all saw the same thing. We have security force guys like Peniston and Burroughs who underwent hypnotic regression. They have missing time. Their watches did not synchronize with the wall clock when they got back to the security forces office, and they varied. One varied was by an hour, the other one varied by 45 minutes. So they had similar joint and then different experiences as their regressions. Then I just did a 2-year case study and produced Victoria's Secret Truth of a family with multi-generational evidence, physical, medical, clinical, photographic evidence of contact with entities they don't quite understand. Yeah. Literally, a boy who had his first contact at 3 and now at 8 years old is telling me the mice people came in the window. They floated me down the steps. They laid me on that table. They put a booger up my nose, which was his interpretation of the implant. And then they touched my eye with a stick. And the next thing I knew, I was back in bed.
Holy shit.
Everything this family has told me synchronizes with cases that have been produced by people much smarter than me. So they're directly in line with other cases. I can't think of another thing that's possible that I could, unless I get personally get abducted, that would make me think any different about the phenomena. I've been to the end of the rainbow. Sure. And book 3 is going to be called Nothing But the Truth. And I've got odds and ends, and hopefully I'll get some metal pieces to find the truth about that and wrap it all up. But for me, it's no longer if.
Speculative.
I saw the UFO 75 feet off the ground, 200 feet in front of me. I don't need any more proof.
Right.
That's all I need. I've been
makes
to
sense.
the end of the rainbow and back, and so it's not an if, it's a who and what and why.
Yeah. It's good stuff.
That's really good.
Thank you so much, Ray, for joining us.
It's our pleasure. Thank
we
you.
got you out of here at 7:09 on the dot. So,
No problem. I'm going
you're,
to take a little potty break. And
you're only a few minutes from your next destination. Hopefully when the next book comes out, we'd love to do this again so you can bestow some more information upon us. Again, the book started off as 50 Shades of Grays, but now it's Alien Shades of Grays.
Victoria's Secret Truth.
Victoria's Secret Truth. Where can they pick up these books, and where can they find you, Ray?
Amazon is the best place to pick up the books.
Of course.
If you make a trip to the Air Force Museum, they're selling the first book. They're selling book 1. And you might try to buy a used copy online, but most people aren't reselling them. So,
Right.
And I saw a book the other day being sold for $79, and I'm thinking I'm undercharging. So, and where can they find me? I'm going to be next week. I'm going to do 2 talks. I'm going to be in Owatton, Kentucky, and I'm going to be, I can't remember the second one in Kentucky. And then on Thursday, I'm going to be at Mount Orab Public Library, and the talks are free, but go up on the library sites in Kentucky. You'll see it. There's lots of ads up there, or go to my Facebook page, and those ads are up there too. So
Okay.
That's great.
Good deal.
Thank you very much. We
Thanks
appreciate
again,
it.
Ray, and hopefully we can do this again soon.
awesome.
All right.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks, Rob.
Yes, sir.
Let's get a quick selfie here. Would you guys?
Absolutely.
And with the studio here in the background. And great job, guys. Really enjoyed it. Lots
Thank
of
you.
fun.